Grief changes shape when there is no body to bury. For 22 years, Marsha Delong imagined her little sister growing older somewhere beyond the Mississippi woods. Then, on the night of the blood moon, Joy called and asked why Marsha had left her there. Before we begin, turn off whatever is making noise around you. Dim the room if you can, and when this story reaches 11:47 p.m., do not look out your nearest window. What happened to Marsha Delong began with a phone call from a girl who had been missing for 22 years. It involved an old farmhouse outside Yazoo City, Mississippi, a locked room no one was supposed to enter, and a stretch of woods where search teams once found a child's shoe without finding a single footprint around it. Even now, there are parts of the Delong case that do not make sense. County records contradict police reports. 3 surviving witnesses remember 3 different versions of the same night. And according to official property documents, the house where Marsha received that phone call had already burned to the ground in 1999. This is the story of what happened when she went back. Marsha was 36 years old when her grandmother Ruth died. By then, she had spent more than half her life trying not to think about the place where she grew up. The Delong property sat outside Yazoo City, beyond a line of soybean fields, drainage ditches, and old hunting land where the pavement narrowed into gravel. The last few miles were the kind of road most people in Mississippi knew better than to take after dark. Cell service dropped near the cattle gate. Trees pressed close to both shoulders. In heavy rain, the road turned to mud and disappeared beneath standing brown water. The house waited at the very end. It was a 2-story farmhouse with gray siding, a sagging porch, and a tin roof stained dark by years of rain. Kudzu had swallowed most of the smokehouse. A rusted hand pump leaned beside the porch steps. Beyond the backyard, the woods began so abruptly that they looked less like part of the property and more like a wall built around it. Marsha remembered those trees better than she remembered the house. They were the last place anyone saw her younger sister alive. Joy Delong disappeared when she was 8 years old. Marsha was 14. The official story was simple. The sisters had been playing near the edge of the property during a lunar eclipse. Marsha turned away. Joy wandered into the woods. By the time the family noticed she was gone, darkness had covered the swamp, and the moon had turned the color of fresh blood. For 9 days, deputies, volunteer firefighters, deer hunters, church members, and neighbors searched the land surrounding the house. They dragged sections of the Yazoo River. They checked wells, culverts, abandoned barns, and hunting blinds. They found one thing: a pink sneaker. It was sitting upright beside a cypress tree almost a mile from the house. The ground around it was soft enough to hold tracks. There were none. No footprints leading in. No footprints leading away. After Joy vanished, the Delong family came apart quietly. Their father disappeared 6 months later. Their mother began drinking and died before Marsha finished high school. Ruth remained at the farmhouse, alone, refusing to sell the property and refusing to discuss what had happened. Whenever Marsha asked about Joy, Ruth gave the same answer. She went where she was called. Marsha left Mississippi as soon as she was old enough. She changed jobs often, moved through several apartments, and learned to avoid any conversation that turned toward childhood. She told people she had no siblings. She told others that Joy had drowned. She never told anyone the truth. The last thing Marsha remembered saying to her sister was not, "Stay here." It was, "There's something in the woods that wants to show you a surprise." For years, Marsha convinced herself she had imagined that part. Then Ruth died. The call came from a funeral home in Yazoo County on a Tuesday morning. Ruth had passed in her sleep. The estate belonged to Marsha. There were documents to sign, personal belongings to sort, and a house that needed to be emptied before anyone could put it on the market. Marsha almost hired someone else to handle it. Instead, guilt made the decision for her. 3 days later, she was driving back through Mississippi with cardboard boxes in the rear of her SUV and an overnight bag on the passenger seat. The farther she traveled from Jackson, the more familiar the land became. Flat fields, drowned tree lines, gas stations with faded signs, churches standing alone beside county roads. The old sense of distance returned before she reached the property. Out there, houses sat half a mile apart. Porch lights looked small against the dark. A person could scream and never be heard over the insects. By the time Marsha reached the final cattle gate, the sun was already dropping behind the pines. The chain was unlocked. That bothered her. Ruth had always kept it secured with a brass padlock, even during the day. Marsha drove through anyway. As the farmhouse came into view, something moved across the upstairs window. A narrow shadow, too tall to be a child. Marsha stopped the SUV and stared. The window was empty. She told herself it had been a curtain. Then she remembered Ruth had nailed every upstairs window shut after Joy disappeared. Marsha sat behind the wheel for nearly a minute before getting out. The evening air was thick and warm. Mosquitoes gathered around her face. Somewhere beyond the trees, a barred owl gave a low call that sounded almost like a person asking a question. The porch boards groaned beneath her boots. The front door opened with Ruth's key. Inside, the house smelled of dust, old pine cleaner, canned vegetables, and something damp underneath it all. Not rot exactly, more like soil after heavy rain. Marsha stood in the entryway, waiting for the familiarity to return. It never did. The living room looked mostly as she remembered it. Floral sofa, crocheted blankets, family Bible on the side table, a framed photograph of Joy at age 7. But small things had changed. Every mirror was covered. White dish towels had been draped over the glass and tied in place with black thread. Every clock had stopped at 11:47. A line of salt stretched across the back door, and upstairs, at the end of the hallway, Ruth's private bedroom had been sealed with 3 deadbolts and a rusted padlock. Marsha had never been allowed inside that room. As a child, she had once asked Ruth what she kept there. Ruth had leaned close enough for Marsha to smell coffee on her breath. Things that still know your name. Marsha spent the first afternoon sorting through the ordinary remains of an ordinary life. Church cookbooks, property tax notices, funeral programs, quilts folded into cedar chests, canning jars labeled in Ruth's sharp handwriting. The normal objects helped. For a few hours, the house became only a house. Then Marsha opened the family Bible. A folded note slipped from between the pages and landed at her feet. The message was written in Ruth's handwriting. The blood moon rises Thursday. Lock every door. Cover every mirror. Whatever you hear, do not enter the woods. Marsha read it twice. Then she looked at the kitchen calendar. Thursday was that night. She almost laughed, but something scraped along the outside wall. 3 slow scratches, a pause, then 3 more. Marsha moved to the kitchen window and lifted the edge of the curtain. The yard was empty. Beyond it, the pines stood black against the dying sky. Crows filled the branches in complete silence. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Every bird was facing the house. Marsha stepped away from the glass. That was when the phone rang. Not her cell phone, the old landline mounted beside the kitchen doorway. Ruth had disconnected it years earlier. Marsha stared as it rang again. The sound echoed through the farmhouse. She picked up the receiver. At first, there was only static. Then a little girl breathed her name. Marsha? Her hand tightened around the phone. She knew that voice. She had heard it in dreams for 22 years. Joy? A low sound moved through the line, like wind passing through leaves. Then Joy whispered, "The locked room is open." Above Marsha, a door slowly creaked across the upstairs floor. And that was when she understood that Ruth had not left the warning to keep something out of the house. She had left it to keep Marsha from discovering what was already inside. Marsha placed the receiver back on the wall, but the little girl's breathing continued through the disconnected phone. Then a second voice whispered from upstairs, "You left me." Carrying Ruth's flashlight, Marsha began climbing toward the room that had remained locked since the night Joy disappeared. The padlock lay bent on the floor. Inside, the walls were covered with missing child clippings. Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, dates circled in red, the same black tree symbol drawn over every photograph. 20 minutes after Marsha called 911, Sheriff Wade Mercer's cruiser rolled into the yard, tires grinding through wet gravel. Mercer was tall, silver-haired, and slightly stooped beneath a dark raincoat. A pale scar crossed his chin. He entered without greeting and glanced everywhere except toward the woods. "The dispatcher never got your call," he said. Marsha pointed to the wall phone. "That line's been dead since 1999. Upstairs, Mercer studied the clippings with no surprise. "You've seen this symbol before," Marsha said. "No," he answered too quickly. They sorted the cases by date. The disappearances came 19 years apart. Every victim was a younger sibling. Every child vanished near family property. Every one had last been seen by an older relative. And every family suffered another death afterward. Joy's clipping had been altered. Her disappearance time, 11:47 p.m., was circled. Below it, Ruth had written, "Wrong child returned. Debt unpaid." Mercer tore the clipping from the wall. "Leave tonight. I'm not leaving without answers." By morning, Marsha was driving Highway 3, questioning people who had known Ruth. Miss Bernice Clay, a retired church secretary, said Ruth held midnight prayer meetings in the woods and called them protection services. Earl Vickers, a former volunteer firefighter, insisted the DeLong house burned down the night Joy vanished. "I watched them carry you out of those woods," he told Marsha. "You weren't breathing." Pastor Daniel Hobb denied any fire. He claimed Joy drowned in the Yazoo River, and Ruth invented the rest to hide family shame. 3 witnesses, 3 different stories, but all 3 stopped talking when Marsha mentioned the blood moon. Before shutting her door, Bernice whispered, "Some places don't haunt people. Some places rewrite them." At the county records office, Marsha found tax maps proving the farmhouse should not exist. The property had been condemned after a fire in 1999. No rebuilding permit had ever been issued. An older map showed a church on the same foundation, New Canaan Chapel. The church disappeared from public records after 14 children vanished between 1931 and 1933. A yellowed article mentioned blood moon baptisms beneath a dead oak. That evening, Marsha played an old VHS tape found in Ruth's room. Joy sat at her 8th birthday picnic table in a yellow dress. Behind her, between 2 trees, stood a tall black figure. Marsha paused the tape. The figure turned its head. then stepped closer. The television snapped off. Upstairs, a child began running. Marsha followed. Every bedroom door slammed at once. The hallway stretched impossibly long. At the far end, Joy stood facing the wall. When she turned, her hands covered her face. She lowered them. Black soil spilled from her mouth. "You promised you'd come back." The hallway snapped back to normal. Marsha collapsed on the kitchen floor. Beside her sat Joy's pink sneaker, though it had been locked in county evidence for 22 years. There was a particular horror in remembering someone forever as a child, knowing they may never have been allowed to become anything else. Kindly like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and which part of the story hit you the hardest. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Now let's get back to the story. Inside the sneaker was a photograph. Ruth held a lantern. Joy was crying. Marsha wore a mud-stained nightgown. And beside them stood a much younger Sheriff Mercer. On the back, Ruth had written, "Thomas chose Joy." Marsha came back empty. Marsha looked up. Mercer stood outside the kitchen window, one finger pressed to his lips. Behind him, something taller than the house slowly rose from the trees. Marsha locked the back door, then the front. When she turned around, Sheriff Mercer was already standing inside the kitchen. He held up a brass key. "Ruth gave me this years ago." Marsha raised the photograph with shaking hands. "Who are you?" Mercer looked at the younger version of himself beside Ruth and Joy. The scar on his chin seemed deeper in the kitchen light. "My name was Thomas DeLong," he said, "before your grandmother buried me and handed me another man's life." Marsha stopped breathing. Her father, Thomas, explained that Wade Mercer, a deputy involved in Joy's search, had died in the woods that same week. Ruth hid the body, altered records, and helped Thomas take his identity. She said someone had to stay close, he said. Someone had to guard the boundary. "You abandoned us." I never left. He had watched from squad cars, church parking lots, and across the road from school. He watched Marsha's mother collapse into alcohol. He watched Ruth age inside the house. He watched Marsha leave Mississippi. Then he told her why. New Canaan Chapel had been built during the Depression by families losing everything to floodwater, fever, and failed crops. Beneath a lightning-split oak, the church elders found something moving under the earth. They called it the Root Walker. It traveled through soil and bloodlines. Every 19 years, one family gave it a child. In return, the river spared their land. The DeLongs became its keepers. "Ruth didn't start it," Thomas said. "She inherited it." Marsha held the photograph tighter. "And Joy," Thomas's face broke. "Joy was never supposed to be taken." Silence filled the kitchen. "You were." As the firstborn DeLong daughter, Marsha carried the mark the creature wanted. But that night, Thomas changed the offering. He gave it Joy instead. "It refused her," he whispered, "and something came back wearing you." Marsha laughed once, but there was no humor in it. She remembered school, her mother's funeral, college, cheap apartments, bad relationships, years of ordinary pain. Thomas asked, "Do you remember a single dream from before that night?" Marsha opened her mouth. Nothing came. He pointed toward the covered mirrors. Ruth had hidden them because Marsha's reflection sometimes changed. The locked room was not a prison. It was a door. Ruth's warning had never been meant to protect Marsha from the woods. It was meant to protect everyone else from what might happen if she entered them. Marsha ripped the towel from the hallway mirror. Her reflection did not move. Marsha stepped back. The reflection stayed close to the glass. Then it smiled. Black branches pushed from its scalp. Its eyes burned red. One finger rose and traced 2 words on the inside of the mirror. "Come home." Marsha smashed the glass with Ruth's flashlight. Thick black water seeped from the cracks, carrying the smell of swamp mud. Outside, hundreds of crows settled into the trees. The house began peeling apart. Wallpaper curled away, revealing fire-blackened beams. The kitchen walls blistered. Family photographs changed, replacing familiar faces with children Marsha had never seen. The severed telephone rang upstairs. Then another rang in the bedroom. Then another inside the walls. Joy called from all of them. "Marsha!" Roots burst through the floorboards. Thomas loaded a shotgun with shells packed with salt, iron filings and splinters from the dead oak. "Totality comes at midnight," he said. "We have less than an hour." A scream cut through the yard. Joy stood at the tree line in her yellow birthday dress. "Please," she cried, "don't leave me again." Marsha ran. Thomas tackled her inches from the woods. Every tree bent toward the house. "The root walker can't cross unless our blood invites it," Thomas said. That call wasn't rescue. It was an invitation. The front door unlocked itself. Joy stood on the porch, smiling with a mouth far too wide. She already invited him 22 years ago. Behind her, something 12 feet tall lowered its antlered head and stepped across the threshold. The root walker crossed the threshold, and the house forgot what it was. The hallway stretched into a black forest path. Roots twisted through the walls like veins. Crows burst through the windows and circled beneath the ceiling, while the blood moon glowed through every opening, even those facing east. The creature unfolded to its full height. Its body looked carved from scorched wood. Its arms hung nearly to the floor. Antler-like branches scraped the ceiling. Red eyes burned above a mouth packed with dozens of small human teeth. Whispers came from inside its ribcage. Children's voices. Marsha and Thomas ran upstairs as Joy glided behind them without moving her feet. Inside Ruth's locked room, the rotary telephone had been pushed aside. Beneath it was a trap door. Thomas pulled it open. A narrow staircase descended beneath the house. At the bottom waited the buried remains of New Canaan Chapel. Children's shoes covered the floor. Rusted bells hung from beams. Names had been carved into wooden pews, some deep enough to split the grain. At the altar lay Ruth's final confession. Marsha read by flashlight. The thing that returned was not my granddaughter. Not entirely. It wore her memories and learned her grief. But I loved it because some part of Marsha still cried inside. I could not kill her. Marsha lowered the page. "Is any part of me real?" Thomas looked at her, tears shining in his eyes. "Your guilt is real. Your love is real. Your fear is real." Roots exploded through the chapel floor. They wrapped around Thomas's legs and dragged him backward. The root walker entered the sanctuary. Using Ruth's voice, it said, "You gave me the wrong daughter." Thomas fired. The shotgun blast tore part of its face away, but black wood knitted itself together. Then Joy appeared beside Marsha. Not the smiling thing from upstairs. This Joy looked frightened. Human. "I've been inside the roots," she whispered. "I used the phones, the mirrors, the tapes. I tried to warn you." The false Joy screamed somewhere above them. "The creature needs its doorway," Joy said. "If you refuse it, it dies." Marsha understood. She grabbed the gasoline can beside the altar and poured it across the pews. Thomas fought the roots. "Run! I can't. Marsha looked at Joy. I'm sorry. Thomas's voice broke. She can hear you. The roots tightened. Thomas was pulled into the floor with a violent crack. His final scream joined the voices inside the root walker. Marsha struck a match. She dropped it onto Ruth's confession. Fire raced through the chapel. Above them, the intact farmhouse burned at the same time as the blackened ruin from 1999. Close your eyes, Joy said. But Marsha saw everything. She remembered the real night. Joy had not been lured into the woods. Marsha had heard something calling from behind the dead oak and followed willingly. Joy chased after her, begging her to stop. When Ruth and Thomas arrived, Joy was alive. Marsha was already gone. The thing that returned had been wearing her ever since. The root walker reached for Marsha. She stepped into the flames. Every missing child screamed through it at once. The blood moon turned black. At sunrise, a state trooper found Marsha barefoot on a county road, covered in ash and carrying Joy's pink sneaker. She led him back. There was no farmhouse, no driveway, only trees. County records confirmed the house had burned in 1999. At a hospital in Jackson, doctors found no burns on Marsha. They found no fingerprints either. 3 weeks later, Marsha lived under observation in a small apartment. She covered every mirror and woke nightly at 11:47. Then a voicemail arrived from her own number. Her voice was running through the woods. Joy whispered, "Marsha was never the child who came back." The locked bedroom door opened. Roots covered the walls. Thomas's badge hung from one branch. Ruth's Bible lay open beneath it. Across the page were 6 words. The blood moon followed you home. Outside, every tree filled with silent crows. The moon began turning red. At 11:47 p.m., Marsha's phone rang again, and a frightened little girl asked why Marsha was standing outside her window.